There's no doubt that this space is getting busier. It's getting busier. There's a lot more hosts than there ever was. The market's tough.
People will buy from things not knowing why. You're just drawn to certain places.
High crime rates, lots of guns, lots of drugs, but some of the most incredible people that have nothing but will give you the shirt off their back and share with you their last meal. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Airbnb Nomads podcast. And on this week's Property Education Masterclass, we are joined by the inspirational Nalassa Cutler. Now, Nalassa is heavily involved in the serviced accommodation and Airbnb market, but exactly what she does, I'm going to keep just a little bit secret until you get into the episode, because what she does and how she brings value to the market is so unique, so different. There's so much value here that I want to keep you on just a little bit of a cliffhanger until we get stuck into the episode. It's really, really interesting. I think you're going to love it. Now, guys, on that note, if you get value from this episode, if you are inspired by this episode to become your best self, I would please ask you to head over and follow the show. And most importantly, if you could leave a review, it helps us more than I could possibly tell you. Until that time, guys, grab a cuppa, settle in. This is a really different episode with a very unique conversation that we're going to be having. So stick around for the whole thing. I can't wait for you to hear it. Here we go. Hey, Nalassa, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Alex.
I am, well, let's see. I'm excited, interested, and mostly intrigued, I think, because we're going to be talking about what you do in the serviced accommodation space, amongst other things. And we're going to talk about your very different and unique way of optimizing listings and helping hosts to increase booking revenue and stuff like that. But it's very, very different. I'm not going to say what it is right now. I want to keep everybody on tenterhooks a little bit, and we're going to get into it. But it's really, really interesting. I think you're probably one of, well, I don't know, a handful of people across the world that maybe do this. Maybe you're the only one. I don't know. We can talk about that, but really, really cool. Nalassa, can we start with, as soon as you start speaking, everyone's going to hear that you're not originally from the UK, and that, so I'd like to start there because I love traveling. I love the States as well. We've spoken about that. There's some common ground there. I used to live there as well. I love it. Can we start by talking a little bit about your background and where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up all over the place. I know this podcast is about travel. I have actually lived in, I lived in 13 houses by the time I was 13. I'm very well movement oriented. So I was born in California, and then I also grew up in the Boston area.
Okay. So is California where you was born?
I was born in Oakland, and I went to school out there as well. And so I've jumped. I consider myself bi-coastal.
Beautiful, beautiful. I've been to California, but I don't really class it as going to California because I went to Disneyland. That's it. I don't think that really counts.
But, some people might say that's like the epitome of California in some ways, but yeah.
It's one of actually the few states that I haven't really spent significant time in. So I lived in Florida, I lived in Colorado, I lived in Washington State, pretty much all over the place. Spent a lot of time in Florida, mostly for work when I was working on the super yachts. And I just love it. The convenience of it, the size of it, the seasons, the different kind of demographic of people, depending on which state you're in. It's such a vast place that it always kind of blew my mind that a lot of Americans don't hold passports. But then at the same time, I'm like, I kind of get it, because you could kind of spend your whole life like traveling in the US.
It's a lot. I was actually just saying, the United States is larger than all of Europe combined, for what it has to offer and different things. Right. We now have Alaska, Hawaii, there's various other places we can go. But yeah, it is amazing how many people don't hold a passport. And and just how, it is vast. There's so much to see from the Rockies. We can do a tour around. Where in Florida were you?
I was mostly in South Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, Miami way. Just because that's where it's like one of the epicenters for yachting, right? You probably know there's big boats there, lots of marinas. So I spent a lot of time there, a lot of time in the Caribbean, Bahamas, Florida, kind of. Nice. That was like the the old stomping ground, for the yachts that are based on that side, and then ended up moving over to Europe in yachting. So, but love it. I wouldn't necessarily say that a lot of the people that don't have passports are automatically really well traveled. I don't think those two things go together, but I can understand the people that just choose to spend time in the US. It's an incredible country.
Yeah.
Yes, there's some conversations to be had around, obviously, the politics behind it, gun laws and all that kind of stuff. But you know, nowhere's
Yeah.
perfect. I
It
think for the most
varies.
part, it's an incredible place. So when did you make the move over to? Is it just the UK within Europe that, or now not so much, but in this part of the world, or have you lived in other parts of Europe?
I Where have I lived? So actually, I also wanted to just mention that I'm also a sailor. I have
Oh, cool.
also love boating. I've sailed the Western Caribbean,
Wow.
and then also the Baja. Yeah,
Yeah,
but I
Baja
absolutely love
Peninsula.
sailing. Um,
Beautiful.
yeah, I live in the UK right now. I do like pet sitting actually part time. So as a way to move around and stay in actually really beautiful places instead of serviced
Hmm.
accommodation, staying in people's homes, taking care of pets, is one of my side things that I do right now, and it
Hmm.
helps me travel and really see places organically.
I
And so
love
I've been
that.
doing that for the better part of the last year. I'm in Edinburgh about
Is it
half the
any
time.
pets? Any pets? All pets, or just dogs, or rabbits, or guinea
Dogs,
pigs? Or...
cats, mostly.
Yeah,
Mostly
can
people have
imagine
dogs
that.
and cats. There's a sit coming up actually that has a rabbit. But yeah,
Cool.
yeah. Um,
A- Anything that I'm a obviously the name of this podcast, the Airbnb Nomads. I am a fan of anything that allows you to kind of have that flexibility and to be able
yep.
to move and pick up and leave whenever you want and change places. And you know I love that. I love that you
Yeah.
found a way to do that.
Yeah, for people watching, Trusted House Sitters is the website.
Yeah,
If I can drop the link, if you
absolutely.
go through my support code, you get 25% off. I get a couple months for free of their membership. But it's a really great way, actually, to be able to travel and have places to stay for free. There's usually no
It
money
is a
exchange.
it is a huge problem for people. We've got a dog. He's not a dog. He's literally, he's part of the family, right?
Yep.
And when it comes to going away, it's a nightmare because I could never. The thought of putting our dog in the kennels, it's not going to happen. So
No.
you just don't go away unless you can find someone that you really genuinely trust to ideally to come and be in your house is the best way so that the dog's not unsettled, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's great. So you have to go through all of the police background checks and all that kind of stuff to make sure that
They do
everyone's
yeah. You create a profile. It's kind of like what Airbnb used to be, actually, I think,
uh-huh.
but like with pets. So this website promotes it as like, go away on travel and take care of pets. And I think it's some pets are way easier to take care of. You're taking care of
Of
cats. You
course.
can usually go things. Dogs usually have quite the routine. Um, but yeah, you create a profile. There's a background check, and then people leave comment or reviews of you. So you end up
Right.
building up a profile in the same way that Airbnb does in some ways. Um, and then if you're the house owner, um, you get up to 5 people, and then you can reject people. Usually you set up a call, see if it's a good fit, make sure it's all good, and then go with people. But it's been great. We've actually, in the last year plus, we've house sat in France, in Switzerland, in Portugal, in Spain, in the UK,
Wow.
and the United States. We had a month and a half long sit in Lake Tahoe in California, which was absolutely amazing. Um, so
And
yeah,
probably, and this is I'm presuming this, but I would have thought that anyone that can afford to use that service, most of the time, the homes that you're going to be sitting are generally pretty nice homes. Is that
it varies, for sure. I mean, and it's the service is relatively cheap. It's cheaper than if you were gonna like one pet sit, uh, for a homeowner, like having one person sit your pet for it's like about $100 or something for a year membership, and then you can go away or transaction on it as much as you want. So it's a relatively low cost, but I mean, like the place I'm staying in right now, this is maybe the nicest place we've stayed at yet in Edinburgh, and it's a beautiful Gregorian house, 4 floors, basement suite, like amazing windows in front of me. Um, and yeah, and I mean, how I work with properties too, I think, and people on this podcast, like you want to create a service accommodation ideally that like is in harmony with the environment or the town or the city or the culture that you're having it in. Like we like to travel because we like experiencing new places and doing that. And so I think this podcast is really, your demographic is really interesting, and like you want to travel, you want to experience this fullness, this aliveness, this growth of different cultures, of excitement. And at the same time, you're trying to create Airbnbs as like a sustainable, profitable business and like maybe your home location. And then how do you give other people traveling that sense of cultural immersion, essence of the place that that house is actually at, for decor and making it uh, what is it called, like a reciprocal space of things. So
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's you know, there's no doubt that this space is getting busier, right? It's getting busier. There's a lot more hosts than there ever was. You know, the market's tough, right? I'm not going to sit here and say that, you know, it's like the good old days where you just take on a property and, you know, the bookings pour in. Yes, there are some very consistent ways of generating bookings with specific techniques and targeting specific demographics of client. You know, talked a little bit about this in some podcasting that I was doing yesterday in the studio. Um, when the economy is struggling, cost of living, inflation, rising
mhm.
mortgage interest rates, all the rest of it, obviously the leisure part of travel within the UK anyway is probably going to see a decline. But when you're working with corporates, with contractors, with essential workers, with people who are unaffected by economic changes, if you're, you know, targeting that demographic, and if you've got really hardcore marketing fundamental skills to get those people through your doors, then you know, it's a fantastic business. And it's a business that, kind of like you touched on, if it's done right, if it's systemized, if it's automated, if you've got teams, if you've got the knowledge and the education to do it, you can also create a business that's, you know, very hands off and allows you to then use it as a springboard to do what is the big reward for me, right? Which
Mm.
is traveling, spending, you know, large periods of time, you know, in Mallorca where I love to be, cycling, being outside in the sun, you know, and all that kind of good stuff. So I love it. That's kind of a nice natural transition into what you do, because this is another thing, another addition, another tool for someone's toolbox when they're looking at optimizing listings and standing out from the crowd and making sure that they've done absolutely everything they can to, you know, generate the big bookings or the consistent bookings. So why don't you do the big reveal and let everybody know what it is that you do? How do you help people in the Airbnb space to improve their listings and make more money?
Yeah, so I design high frequency spaces. And so that's both done with individuals in their homes as well as looking at the energetics, or, you know, sometimes when you are in Airbnb or in any space, there's almost like a buildup of, it's not cared about. There sometimes, essentially, it's just negative energy builds up in a place, and then the people who come there, they might not sleep as well, they might not appreciate or take care of the space as nice. And well, you know, the design aspect is all important, there's still like an energetic layer that is on the space. And so I help really refresh properties. So it's a deep energy clearing. I've it's called dowsing, if people want to look it up, is one word for it. Um, and it's really just doing a thorough look at, from EMF frequencies to electromagnetic, like earth energy, things that could be negative going through the place. And it really changes the whole frequency of the space, that makes it so when people go there, they can feel comfortable. They can, the same way that we travel and go to spaces filled with nature or filled with aliveness, it actually clears the energy of the home to allow people that when they're there to feel inspired to have what you're going for, the intention of the space be in alignment with what you're actually wanting.
Wow. If it's okay with you, I'm going to try and break this down and
Okay.
understand it, because I know, right, when I'm uh, the way that my brain works is I need to take something that I don't quite understand and I need to try and compare it to something that I experience in my own everyday life. So when you're speaking about energy and the way something makes you feel and the surroundings, I immediately go to, okay, I know that when I'm in the UK, when I'm in big open green fields walking the dog, I feel at peace, right?
Mm.
When I'm seeing trees, when I'm seeing nature, when I'm, got that lush green grass under my feet, when I can see the dog, running around having fun, I feel at peace. So I understand that your surroundings obviously heavily, affect the way that you feel. What I can't understand, and hopefully you can break it down, is how do you physically change a space or a frequency or a vibration within a set place? How do you go about doing that?
Um, so similar to, I mean, energy healing or any sort of energy healing, like people's bodies respond to, like, we are electromagnetic beings,
Hmm.
and everything, if you want to look at a quantum level, like everything is energy. And so I mean, it's through intention. It's through, I do put cures sometimes actually in the place, or if I'm working with people remotely, I will send cures and tell people where to put them. And I work heavily
Sorry,
with
you said cures.
cures. There's various, there's some metal rods that are essentially like energetically programmed, and we'll place them around the house. And there's various ways that I think about uh, putting physical things in your space that will change the energy, as well as purely energetic things for I how you incorporate the full spectrum of the space. Um, it I so there's the purely energy level of clearing it, like how you would have a Reiki session or do something like that. Essentially, I do like a
Yep.
Reiki for the home or acupuncture for the home, where you put like
Okay.
something in a place and it actually changes what that frequency is like. If you've ever had acupuncture, you put a needle in one space and it hits a
Yeah.
nerve and it realigns the energy of the space. And so it's somewhat similar in that process with homes.
Okay. So are we talking about physically moving, physical objects, or can everything remain the same and it's purely the energetic state around the sofa or around the things that are there that needs to be changed?
So how I view it, like, so you can do only one or only the other, like they're not exclusive on each other. But I have found that um, when you're dealing with if you're starting with the energetic, those other physical movements will become obvious and natural, and you'll just want to do them because you can feel it being off. So I
Okay.
really view it as, I mean, in feng shui, or I incorporate aspects of feng shui and thinking about, like, I do very organic feng shui. And like, you come into a room, or when you're setting up a home for staging, it's like you want a statement piece. You're creating balance. I mean, the whole thing is creating balance in a home, creating a space
Sure.
that people feel good in. And so it's going essentially to the primary level of that. But there's aspects that are physical, and then there's also aspects like when you're in nature, when you're giving the example of being in nature
Hmm.
and being in this like open thing, like nature is constantly always in balance, like it's always purifying itself, it's always naturally in balance. And homes sometimes aren't in balance, um, and there isn't ways to correct itself. And so, essentially, with intention, like I incorporate aspects of nature, like even to get a little bit out there, like if you're by the seaside, even just like welcoming in the salt breeze, like the essence of like a forest that's outside or the oceans that's nearby will actually change the energy frequency of the space or the rental or the Airbnb or your home that you're in. And
Yeah.
it can be subtle. Yeah.
Okay. I mean that makes a lot. Look, I'm not the most woo-woo person in the world, but I definitely buy into the whole energy thing. I get it. I completely can see how this would work. But when you speak about, a place on the coast with a sea view potentially,
Hmm.
and you say, if we just allow for the sea breeze to blow through, that's going to be a nice thing. Obviously, that's going to be a nice thing. What do we do with a two up, two down in Greater Manchester? That's opposite an overgrown park with a load of graffiti sprayed across the slide. What I'm just nothing against Greater Manchester. I've got properties in Greater Manchester. That's why I went there. But what's you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
how do we fix that?
Yeah.
At the other end of the spectrum.
So it's working with the people. So like, it's on a lot of it could kind of be looked at as a ceremony or like an intention, but it's like it's acknowledging those things, and then it's like going back down to like what was Manchester like, what was that park like without graffiti, like what is it wanting to tell you. So it's speaking with nature to some degree of what are you and what is your intention for that place. Like you're obviously not wanting people to stay at your flat and be like, you're gonna stay in like a rundown area of Manchester
Right.
with graffiti on the walls, unless you really wanted to highlight that for like the clientele. But ultimately, you would um, see like, well, what? So there's a whole energy aspect of um, reconnecting and honoring the land that was there, and honoring the ancestors, honoring the water, honoring all of these different aspects. And like in that essentially gifting or communing with this, it will actually change the energy of the place that you're in. It's really establishing like a strong energetic connection. I also work with ley lines, which can get out there, but different energy lines. And so if you're in a place that is really dense, um, it is tuning into like, well, what is your blueprint or what are you wanting to do? So if you are still wanting to connect with a forest that's nearby or the ocean or something that you love, or you're wanting to essentially gift to the people that are staying there for a certain frequency, I also do like energetic lines. So it's actually creating like a triad, connecting these spaces and then bringing it in through decor as well. But the energy is usually always first. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's uh, I can, like I say, I keep saying I completely understand and buy into it. I think it's hard for people who don't have any experience with it to understand it.
Yeah.
But I would say to anyone who doesn't understand it to reach out to you, right, and find out about it, because it might be something that when they do it and they see it and they feel it, then it's like, okay, this is nice. This is working. But I think until you get to that point, see you work,
Yeah.
see the process, see the outcome, and then it's like, okay, now it's kind of making sense. Um, so where did this and just thinking again, comparing it to my own experiences, would you say that there's a difference between the way that a place can make you feel, as in not getting enough natural light, for example, compared to the fact that there's just a bad energy? Like, is that like a similar thing? Is it that I'm not getting the good energy because this place is just too dark? And the reason I ask that question is because my property where I live when I'm in Mallorca, which is in the most incredible position, it's kind of similar to being in, you know, the most central part of London, where you get to be in the location, but the place you're living in is small, right? Because
Hmm.
if it because it's so expensive. So in Mallorca, I'm slap bang in the middle of town. I walk out, everything's right there. But the consequence of that is that the place is very small. It's on a very small kind of in the old town, cobbled streets, beautiful architecture, but small. And the opposite side of the street is literally like 3 meters away from my terrace. So I get almost no light in the
Hmm.
apartment. So I find it almost impossible to spend any time in there outside of sleeping, having breakfast, doing a podcast, and the rest of the time I've got to be outside.
Hmm.
So is that the energy, or is that because I'm not feeling that light on me?
Uh, I mean, I'd want to see the space and everything. Like it
Yeah.
could be both. Um, I do find that, you know, um, places with dense energy will often feel darker. And often, if you're just living in like a basement flat, like there's not going to be much light.
Hmm.
But then it's like, how do you play to those attributes or make it lighter? Um, and especially if you're on a busy street, like there's lots of the energy itself could be somewhat chaotic or busy, and so then also it's uh, there's so many different levels to what to look at, um, to see, and then it's also like what is your relationship, and then how do you creatively solve for those. So it would be doing, and then yeah, and so then how do you bring in aspects to bring in the beaches from Majorca to the small flat, or bring in lighting in different ways and stuff. And I don't know how design savvy you are, so there's like tricks of the trade for like how to make a place feel more bright and everything. But then so it's both that, and then also there could be stuck or dense energy there from a thing. Um, and when you clear
Yeah.
the energy, like yeah,
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
when you clear an energy of a place, often like things will feel more vivid. It will feel brighter. It will feel like all of a sudden it's just kind of like, oh, like um, it's almost like a breath of fresh air or a feeling of expansion that happens. And it doesn't matter how, like sometimes it's even noticeable on pictures and stuff. And what I was going to say earlier when you were talking about a place, like I think like great design is felt. Is a saying that I have. Like you go into a place and you're like, am I going to be comfortable here? Like there's so many like small subtleties of
Absolutely.
our bodily systems that we're paying attention to. This often happens more noticeably if you are about to buy a house or moving to a new place, and you're like, can I feel comfortable here? Is this place for me? And so um, essentially, like in doing the energy work that I do, it's coming back to that subtlety. Like what are you picking up on here that like makes your body feel comfortable or not comfortable in a place, and then the design is layered on top of that.
If you love to travel like me and you understand the power in escaping the money for time exchange trap, but you just don't know how to do it, then building an Airbnb consultancy business could be exactly what you have been looking for. Right now in the UK, there is a completely untapped opportunity through helping struggling Airbnb hosts by turning around their underperforming properties and generating you huge commission payments in the process. We are going to teach you all of the tools and all of the techniques that we've learned over the last 5 years through building our very own multiple six-figure Airbnb business, arming you with everything that you need to swoop in and save the day. Minimal startup costs, zero risk, and almost unlimited potential. Sound good? Welcome to the Airbnb Consultant. Contact us through any of the channels included in the studio notes to get the conversation started. Well, Nalassa, it just basically hit me like a lightning bolt. For anyone who's sitting at home thinking, this is bullshit, what's Nalassa talking about? I would say to those people, every single one of us has walked into a property, whether you're looking to buy or whether you're going to visit a friend, and you've walked out of everybody has walked out of that property and either gone, oh, you know, that felt really nice and it felt really nice and homely in there, or God, I really felt like I felt a bit antsy in there, and you don't quite know why. I think it's more apparent when you're looking at buying a home,
Yep.
and you go into a home and you leave and you're like, that was the one. That was the one that felt nice. It felt right. It flowed nice. And you might sit there and go, well, why was that? You don't really know, but you just like, that's the one.
Hmm.
So that would point to pretty much what you're talking about, I guess.
Exactly.
That feeling that's in your gut. You don't know why, but it's there.
Yeah, and that's like all those like little things that are kind of unobtainable. And like when I do a thorough energy clearing of a space, it's essentially aligning and allowing all of that kind of bent up negativity to settle and dispel, and allowing for essentially light to come in, or spaciousness, or that feeling. And maybe you'll go to a place and you're like, oh, it's fine. Some places will be like overly heavy, or on the flip side, if you have like a brand new build, it will feel like almost like too sterile and you can't do anything
Yes.
about it. So those are kind of the two extremes of like
Yeah.
overly
Zero
dense.
character, no soul.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then it's like, how do you bring in character? How do you bring life to it? Essentially, the land's been stripped, like things have been essentially just like demolished, and like it's not alive anymore. Versus the other, there's too much heaviness, there's too much trauma essentially in the place, and you'll feel that too. So those are kind of the two extremes of the spectrum. And then there's the nice middle, of, if you think about being in nature, or being in the redwoods, or being by the seaside, there's this feeling of spaciousness, of calm, and ultimately you're wanting a home that heals, a home that you can thrive in, will be vibrating at a higher frequency than what you are normally living in. And that allows for greater creativity, it allows for greater sleep. It allows for, like, if kids sometimes feel restless, or animals, all of that can do with either psychic activity, or electronics getting kind of in the way, or making it so you can't think quite right. So there's like all of these different like health issues that can be present simply from the energy in your house being off.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's kind of similar to, like taking a writer and, they're going to set up their desk with a view, right? So they can see things that helps them with their process. And it's at the end, and it all comes back to that energy, right? What is it that we're looking, feeling, tasting, smelling that's changing the way that we're feeling internally, that then allows us to, be our most creative, or be at most peace, or be
Mm-hmm.
comfortable, or whatever it is, so, yeah, it's interesting, because when you first start talking about it, you're like, well, I don't quite understand how this could work. But then when you start comparing it to real life things, it's just how my brain works. I have to compare it to real life, tangible feelings that I have. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I can see this now. So what are some of the, when does somebody know that they need to clear or fix or work on the energy in their property? What's some of the things that they might be experiencing, would you say?
Some of the things I just mentioned, like if you, some rooms, like some places in your house, you're just like kind of like, I just don't like being in that room. Or like kids might avoid like
Yeah.
dark hallways or certain closets, especially when younger people will, sometimes be their sensory system of like ideas of ghosts, or things that just don't feel right. Um, Also, like if there's bad reviews, bad tenants. Like, I've chatted with one person, and they, you just have a problem property. Like, if you know that the history of the place used to be with like drug dealers, or people that didn't care about the place, or if there has been, if someone's died in a place, like knowing the history a little bit, like all of those, like pretty much most locations could definitely be used for like a good clean. If you think about, how often,
What's
like,
gone on there? Yeah.
yeah,
Every property's got a history, right?
every property has a history, and most people don't deal with property cleanings. And so, I mean, really, I'd say any place could use one if you were interested. It could definitely benefit. Like, you can always get cleaner and better and brighter. And so, I'd say anyone. But there's been things where, especially for people's individual homes, with energy lines and dows, and clearing some frequencies. Like this person was having knee pain, and then you scan it, and literally there's a negative energy line that is going across their knees, and you clear that from the space, and literally their knee pain stops. Um, there often, when you clear spaces, there sometimes won't be any wildlife around. Like you just won't hear it. Like
Mm-hmm.
I cleared a space with a group a little while ago, and about a year ago, the woman that lived there had a strong affinity for the certain bird that hung around there, and the birds had stopped being there. And we did our clearing, and the next morning the bird came back. And so the idea of like having a space that allows for wildlife, that allows for people to want to gather there, like this is all working on that subtle energy of a space.
Okay. A question for you. I have no idea about these questions, by the way. This is just my brain being curious. If a property, and we're talking about Airbnb specific here, if a property has a bad energy, can that energy kind of radiate out of the property and actually stop the property from being booked, like subconsciously? Is
Mm-hmm.
that possible?
Absolutely. I so I in actually Edinburgh a little while ago, or it's been about a year ago now, I dowsed this property, and it was, central Edinburgh on like the primary street that you want. And the person had some tenants in there that didn't take care of it. The place was still fine. She had the same like the photos on her web on the profile were good. They were really lively, but then people would get there and they didn't match, like the frequency of the photos when they were taken, which was before these people that didn't respect the property lived there, um, were there. And so people would book it, but then, and same thing, I think when you're booking, like you're also tuning to that fine thing. Like you think about, the location, does it look nice, all this stuff, but you're also subtly being like, is this where I want to be? Like you're feeling into what it is. And so we cleared the property. We did our whole session. And since then, she finally wrote me a review, and her bookings increased. Her reviews ended up going up. Like essentially, we realigned the photos to like the actual energy that was with the photos originally, as opposed to what it was then. And she didn't change any. She didn't change the pictures. She didn't change what was actually in the property at all. Like we only dealt with the energetics, and she ended up becoming a super host. She ended up getting more positive reviews, so more bookings, more positive reviews, um, in the time, is simply just from changing the energy of the place.
So the energy that's being radiated from the property can literally draw in bookings, draw in eyeballs that convert into
Yeah,
more money,
and
basically.
and so I do energy, and I also do design work. So it's also, having an eye, like as anyone knows, having good pictures, actually having a place that's good, that deals to the type of client you're wanting, whether that's
Sure.
a good friend of mine specifically does like essay, service accommodation, decor ideas for, how do you create your profile? How do you do design for profit, to make it stand out? And she also actually does do energy work somewhat too, but she doesn't talk about that part as much just because it doesn't uh,
Yeah.
land as easily. But it definitely makes a huge difference in people just feeling comfortable and liking being in a place, which then creates more reviews. And that, as with like, there's a whole genre of business that is dealing with, you work on your frequency, you work on your attractive, where electromagnetic means what is attracting you to a place. Like people will buy from things not knowing why they want to buy from there, just because it's like, oh well, that one just feels right. Same thing with buying a house. It's like, oh, that
Yeah.
just like, you're just drawn to certain places. And when either a person or a property has a strong uh, energy field, if you will, then more people will, like better quality people and more people, the right types of people will be attracted, because people want to stay where they feel comfortable, where that frequency is aligned with the experience they're wanting.
I feel like, and again, I could be wrong on this. I would imagine, for all the wrong reasons, that it's probably quite difficult for you to, uh, you know, get people on side with this when it comes to properties with energy and with everything that we're talking about here. But there's a huge shift in the world with people ourselves starting to understand now about energy and, you know, how we need to be vibrating at a certain frequency to attract positivity and success in all parts of our life. And in my head, I'm thinking, is that because I completely buy into all that stuff. I practice that stuff. I agree with it. I understand it. I read it. I buy into that. But I think it's because I know that I'm a living, breathing thing, right? And somehow, and completely incorrectly, I'm seeing I'm seeing myself as, yeah, I've got energy. I know the energy needs to be this and that and positive and vibrating at this different frequency to attract goodness and abundance and wealth and success and happiness. But I can't quite see it as easily in a house because it doesn't have a heartbeat, a physical heartbeat. So in my head, I'm thinking that's where I'm struggling to kind of put them in the same kind of world. They belong in the same world. I understand that a house is still just frequency and vibrations and you know,
Hmm.
I get that. So how do we get people on side with this? Because I want people to get on side with it. I think it's great and I think it's real and I think it works. I'm trying to think, how can we get people to get past the this just doesn't make sense to me
Like it's such
thing.
material. Like why does it matter? Or
Yeah.
like it's just like their walls. Like what makes a difference if you're
Yeah, they're just like they're hard walls. They're just concrete walls. But how can we
yeah.
change that? I understand why people might think, how can we change that?
Um yeah, I mean I think there's like I mean, Einstein even talks. I'm touching the wall on my side right here.
Yeah.
Like Einstein talks about like everything is density. Like everything is most things are space. And, you know, like 99% of all atoms is space. So 99% of everything we're around is space. And um, I mean, I think it goes back to, you know, it's like you enter a place and you know if you like it or you know if you don't like it, and it's
Mm,
and I think I'm not necessarily here to try to convert people. Like, you know, I like if you're a materialist and think the only thing's materialist, like I'm not going to force you, but like I
hmm.
can guarantee that you'll feel a difference
Yeah.
when you go into a place that's one way or another, and sometimes it might not even be conscious, but it's just like kind of like oh, like this just you know you can deal with like colors of frequency, like colors like make you feel different ways. Um, but what were you actually asking? Like,
Do you feel that is the people that kind of generally warm to you with this stuff? Is it generally more women, or do they generally come from a certain background? Are they involved in specific kind of ways of living, or is it a real mix of people? I'm just kind of thinking that, you know, someone who goes to yoga 4 times a week and meditates every morning and journals might buy into this a lot easier than, you know, John the scaffolder that, you know, goes to the pub every
absolutely.
night.
Yeah, I
Probably.
mean, there needs to be
Yeah.
a certain level of like understanding, like energy and like what's
Yeah.
caught, like being sensitive to that. I think you know more and more there's like highly sensitive people, people that have like I think most people there's people that are more aware of like when their energy like when their house is disorganized or cluttered or
Yeah.
has the just different things going on in it, they can't think as well. Like people I think are constantly like we're constantly in relationship to where we're living and what we get from that place. I think when you're doing a serviced accommodation and you're stylizing it, making it for someone else, it's like, you know, a home is different than a place that people stay for a couple of nights. And sometimes you'll be like, well, it doesn't need to be like anything fancy.
Mm.
Like it's just like it's a bed, it's a place, it's your place in Mallorca that's like I'm just going to eat and be there, and like really I'm going to be out of the house. And so it's looking at well, what are you designing for? And people that are setting up, it's like are you designing for someone to like really have you know a 5-star accommodation and have think about all of their preconceived needs and making a place feel comfortable and home, or is it like a place like McDonald's for instance where it's like everything's right, they're hard seats, like you're not wanting anyone to stay for more than like 5 minutes to
Right.
eat a burger and leave. And so all of this is in like the design of like what are you, who's your end user, who's your customer, and then I mean that's the design aspect of it, but then there's also the energy aspect of it's like you know if you're wanting people to only be at your place for a night, it doesn't really matter as much, as opposed to like people that like, I think you need to care to begin with and then be sensitive to the things. And when I work with people, it is really working on like, your energy, your love, your thing. And one thing that I talk about places, any spaces, but homes, service accommodations, like how people want to be loved, places want to be loved, places want to be loved, they want to
Right.
be used, they want to feel cared about. And I think that uh, whether that comes from the person doing the work there definitely plays a role. And then there's also the subtlety of the history of the place. It's like if um, it almost like evens itself out. So like if a if a trauma happened in a place, or if someone was killed in an apartment and then you're trying to make it a serviced accommodation, like that discordance is literally like living in the walls. Like it doesn't matter if you painted a really bright color, like even that bright color might still feel agitating, for instance.
Right.
And so in going through and I'm almost like just giving the place a love bomb on like an energetic and then ripple out
Okay.
level, it changes the frequency of that place and makes it so that like inborn trauma in the walls isn't then experienced by people that are residing there for a short time.
Yeah, so it basically it all starts to make a hell of a lot more sense, and more easy to accept when you break it down to a basic level that we're all energy, right? You, me, the plants, that wall, the car outside, right? We're all energy, and all energy needs to feel loved in order to give back, right? It's basically that simple, and accepting that that is the case, and not just seeing it as, well, that's a wall, how the hell can a wall be needing love like I do? but but it does, right? It's, I mean, who are we to say that we're any better than the, than the wall or the car? We're all just energy, and that's basically what you've got to understand.
It,
So sorry, did you want to add to that?
I just want to say, like, and so the subtlety with that too, it's like it's also like you as the owner of this place, like you're stewarding it. And so while a person that's just coming in might not be like consciously aware of it, like your relationship or your honoring of the walls as like a support structure, as creating the container for this space for then hosting, well, the energy might be more subtle from the actual building, like your relationship to it is so, will like amplify it, and that amplification is what people feel when they come to bookings, to come to
Yeah.
different things. And so when I work on people's homes specifically, it's working with you and the house together and expanding that relationship, but doing that with even the intention of the place will change how outside people that aren't aware of it coming into it will feel.
Wow, it's really, really a very interesting subject, and I think that, yeah, I think as people are listening to it, and you can start making kind of real tangible kind of comparisons to real life. I think once you understand it, then you start to really understand the benefits of it. And I would absolutely implore anyone to reach out to you. Even if it's just initially out of an interest, right, to
Yeah.
see what it's all about, and why not give it a go? If you're not hitting the numbers that you want to be hitting, and you've hung the extra pictures, and you've thrown on the nice fluffy throw pillows, and you're kind of starting to run out of ideas, you know this is something extra that's available, that you offer, that could potentially make a huge difference, like you were saying, to this, your previous person that you work with, that's now a superhost. Bookings, reviews coming in, everything's on the up. um, and I just keep coming back to, I know that when I am happy, when I'm healthy, when I'm feeling the sun, or when I'm, around good people, again, energy, right? Energy all keeps coming back to this word. Good shit happens. I did a post about this yesterday. It's literally that simple. When I'm feeling good, when I'm in the right circles, around good people, vibrating at the right frequency, stuff just drops out the sky. Relationships come about, business opportunities come about, bookings are up, everything's good.
Yeah.
When you're the opposite, and you're wallowing and you're dark and it's like misery. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
all connected. Completely buy into it. So I guess some people might be sitting at home thinking, well, how the hell do you get into this space? So where did this come from? This talent or gift? Is it something that's in you? Is it something you can learn or?
I was actually it's evolved very naturally for me. I've moved a lot growing up, as I mentioned earlier. I've always loved adventure. I've loved traveled. I've traveled to over 40 countries. We haven't even talked about traveling so much
Mm.
on my
It's
experiences.
been so interesting hearing about the actual thing you do, but yeah.
Um, and so it's getting this aliveness of space, and I've moved a lot, and I've set up a lot of homes. So it's in my background has been you know somewhat, my mother was somewhat of a hoarder, and so we'd move to different places, and I'd see how I would change how I felt or how I'd interact with the space, and then also like what were the things that remained consistent. And then when we're trying to declutter, get rid of stuff, it's like all of the different trauma that we are attached to the possessions of these things. And so I really deal with like the psychology behind like spaces and environments, and then really honing on that fine tuning of I feel good in this place. Like, why is that? What are the is it the lighting? Is it this? Is it that? And then all, yeah, so it's just like really refined. I've had some of a traumatic childhood, and I was actually just listening to another person who does work on this, Winford, in Elevate, if people are on that or know about it at all. Last night, him talking about genius and trauma kind of going hand in hand of how do you develop at a younger age. I was made to actually interpret and look at all of these different environments and internalize and make sense of that at a very um, unconscious and subtle way. And so in dealing with energy of creating spaces that feel good to be in and that feel alive and feel that I can support myself in, specifically to begin with, like I always loved making forts, making closets, making like little clubhouses in the different places that I was at, setting up my room to make it be like, what am I, what will support me right now in my expression, and doing that over and over and having to do it over and over instead of staying in the same space for 20 years and then being like, oh, like something kind of needs to change. And so I've really refined my skill. I think travel and adventure and the idea of like, what is your passion? Like, what fills you and makes you feel good? And then how do you bring that into your home? Um, how do you have the container that you live in feed, feed your soul, feed your spiritual growth, feed how you can show up in the world as your fullest self? And I think ultimately that comes down to connection, support, feeling that you belong.
So you've learnt the best way, which is years of hands-on experience, right? Which to me is way better than someone that's like, oh yeah, I've got this bit of paper I studied for 3 years. You've done this over and over and over again, and you've learned through the process, and you've now mastered it to where you are today, which is fantastic. Another reason to definitely reach out and connect with you over this stuff. So let's like you said, let's spend a few minutes talking about the travel. I know you've been all over the place. Um, we've got a pretty good solid idea about what you do, how you can help benefit hosts, to increase their bookings, make more money, have nicer homes, even for not just Airbnb, right? For people who have residential homes that maybe just aren't quite feeling the vibe, reach out to Nalassa, get her around there, or even you do this stuff over the internet as well, which there's no excuse. So tell us a little bit about the travels. Like, where have you been? What's the favorite place you've been to? What is it that
Oh,
really serves you about the traveling aspect that keeps you going with it? I mean, I know it feeds my soul for sure, but what is it that you get from it?
yeah. I mean, ever since I moved a lot growing up, but
Yeah.
I always have had that the world is too big to stay in one place, which is almost the opposite
Mhm.
of, I guess, some Americans. I've always loved culture, different ways that people can do things. I mean, I also think about spaces and environments. I think my favorite, um, I guess, nuance about travel is, and it's how I think about spaces too. It's like you can't, it doesn't matter how much you learn about India, like going there and being in the heat and the smells and like feeling the energy of the place is completely different. And so like I'm very sensory aware. Um, and then when anyone talks about it, it's like, oh, like I know exactly what they mean by that feeling, by that place, by that richness, this subtlety, this depth of a place. Um and I love new experiences. I love food. I'm a foodie. I love warm climates. I love rain. I just like all of the things that you experience when traveling. I find one thing between like working with homes, working with spaces, essentially we dull our senses because our minds are constantly filtering out. Like we don't need to pay attention to all the different things. Like the reason why some things form is we just get like blind to our senses, like our smell, like if we still are smelling something that's bad, like you won't be able to know what your house smells like anymore because you essentially tune it out.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think when traveling, you're in the complete unknown. And so all of your senses, all of your aliveness, all of your ways of like exploring are heightened, and we literally absorb our world, absorb our life more fully.
That's a really good point, that you when you live in a when you go around to somebody's house and you walk in, and then when you leave you're like, damn, that smelled really bad in there, right? When you go into a place for the first time. But as when you're the owner and you're going back there every time, you stop smelling it. So is
Mhm.
that, how does that happen? Is that a mental thing that
It's
you
a
block it out
bodily,
somehow?
it's our, like, essentially, our bodies will end up tuning out, like, our actual body senses, I think, like, 50, like, I don't remember the names, like 50,000 bits of information a moment is how much
Right.
our bodily systems actually do. And we're only conscious about 3,000 of them. Numbers are totally off, but like some magnitude of those things. And so a smell, like if it's not important anymore, we don't need to notice it. Like our body doesn't make that as something that like is important or that will change, and therefore we just don't even notice it anymore.
That's really, really interesting. Yeah. How can you just stop smelling like a really strong dog smell, but everyone else who walks in?
Our,
I know that when I bought my house in Dunmow, close to Felsted in Essex, and I was looking at other houses, and I remember we went to look at one, and this it was a beautiful house, but the owner had two bulldogs, and as soon as you open the door, it was just like it just hit you, like the smell of the dogs and the urine and the carpets and all this kind. He was obviously completely, you know, couldn't smell anything, but it was so overpowering. It's like, how can your brain do that and just turn off that switch that stops you? But you leave the house, you smell everything. You go back in the house, and it's like there's nothing. It's like it doesn't register. It's really interesting.
yeah, it probably just registers as like home to him.
Yeah,
And so it's just like this like mellow, like it's probably just a, it probably does smell, but he won't associate that smell with grossness or negativity so much as like his place. But it won't smell the same to him. Like it won't, like
no,
the different, like essentially his olfactory nose like essentially isn't registering that as like a negative thing that he should be concerned about anymore, and it's just a place.
right, right.
um
I'm interested to know, and I think I know the answer to this because of who you are as a person. But I'm interested to know: do you have like any kind of a plan, like a direction, or is it just with all of this, with what you're doing with the dog sitting or the pet sitting, with the travel? Like, is there any kind of a direction, or is it literally just you get up every day and it's you just want to live life to the fullest, which is awesome?
I mean, I'm growing my business right now, looking for that. Like, I absolutely love working with houses and
Yep.
people and energy. I mean, in general, I feel like life is made to be like lived.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I'm in the process of looking to see what piece of property makes sense and where I want to be. Like, I would like to have a home, so like that's in the pipeline of settling down. I'd ideally like to have uh, two or three places that I kind of jump between organically.
Yeah. That's
Um,
the best way to do it, isn't it? Have two or three places and just move between them, follow the seasons. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I've definitely chased summer before, not escaped winter rather, in the past
Where would
for
those
periods of
three
time.
places be in the world?
Oh, I do not know yet. I
Now I'm
mean,
putting you on the spot. Now the big
I've thought about
questions.
Central America a little bit. I like I like good fruits,
Yep.
food, warm water, ocean are definitely like the criterias. Ideally, somewhere that's both like by mountains and by sea. I lived in Bali for a while. I've lived in Ecuador. Um, I've now been living in Edinburgh, and yeah, so somewhere with good fruit, warm seas, ocean view would be lovely.
That immediately takes me back to. I mean, I spent many years living in Thailand, in Indo, and the fruits there. You know, we'd run out. When I was a scuba diving instructor, we'd run out and get our lunch from the toothless old lady that would be pushing the trolley. With the most incredible mangoes and sticky rice. It'd be like 20 cents for a bag of like the most incredible freshest fruit, but and then I lived in Honduras as well for
Mm,
a year and a bit in Central America, which was an experience. I mean, the poorest country in Central America, high crime rates, lots of guns, lots of drugs. But again, like a lot of these places, some of the most incredible people that have nothing but will give you the shirt off their back and share with you their last meal.
yeah.
So some of the best experiences come from some of those places where life is hard, but ironically, it's almost like that's where the happiest people are. Because when you take away all of the materialistic shit, all that's left is community and sharing and protecting each other. So, you know, you're welcomed in. Whereas you go to the States where it's like awash with money, it's all about having the biggest TV and the biggest truck or whatever. And anyone that kind of gets in the way of that or comes near to it, it's like, hey man, like back off. This is me, my immediate family, and that's it. No one else is coming near. So it was interesting, but yeah, some really
Yeah.
really cool places.
Very different
Bali,
perspectives.
I feels like it's got a little commercialized these days.
I was there during COVID, and so like there was no tourists or anything. It was actually really a
Yeah,
fantastic time to be there.
yeah. There's so
Yeah.
many. There's too many places to see. It's a problem. I don't know what we're going to do about it, but we'll continue
Slowly,
to do our
slowly.
best.
Mm.
So as we get close to the magic hour here, or maybe we're a little bit over, I want to finish up. A couple of things. First, I want to speak about how can people work with you. What is it that you've got going on? What is it that you're offering? What's the process, and how does it all work? How can people benefit from this incredible stuff that you practice?
Yeah, I so my introductory like one-off session is called a home and soul alignment session, and it's an hour. It's both like energy and design work. So I'll talk to you about your space, what's going on, kind of your relationship, and then I really take people on what I call an AVM, or a guided visualization meditation, and it really hones in your energy of who you are and what you're wanting to create for that place. And sometimes it sparks creativity, it sparks clarity. Sometimes I really meet you where you're at. So it's kind of like a, it's a channeling or a reading to some degree, but it's a very full session of where you're at and helps both fine tune the energy and what you're wanting to move forward with the place. So if anyone needs clarity of both like design, but then also wants um, to just have a burst of like love and compassion and insight, it really fine tunes like the energy you're going for a place. And those are one-off sessions that people can book through my website. And then from that, if you want a deeper clearing of a place or design help, I create both custom packages where people are at to see how I can help essentially in consulting or supporting you for ongoing design or doing a thorough clean, a thorough cleanse of your home to help with Airbnb or to help with just making places that people love to be in.
Okay, sounds amazing. And just so people know who are listening, who might be interested in this can all be done remotely. So you don't
Yes.
need to physically be close to the property.
Yep. It can all be done remotely. I also travel around quite a bit. So if you want to do something in person, I have some ongoing clients. I have a person actually in Texas that's designing her dream home right now. And I'll be going there in a month to help with things in person. But that's obviously a long-term project, but shorter projects of things, tons. It's amazing. People are always amazed at how much you can get done remotely. But when you have like the fine-tuned senses, I think of everything in 3D and like, I can see pictures of place and literally I'm like walking through the location, which I realize that
Wow,
people don't have that talent and it looks like
that's a
magic to
real
people.
gift. That's
But for me, I'm just like, oh, like this is going to be this is that. Sometimes you can see things in pictures that you wouldn't necessarily notice. So I'll ask for certain angles of things for things. And then the actual cleansing part, there's many different steps of I, create quite a big intake, the actual clearing. So I'll have an intake process with you where I gather information. Um, I'll tune in by myself, essentially create a report of what needs to be done, what replaces, do the energy session, and then we'd have a follow-up session where I'd fill you in on the findings, what goes there, and I would send you various cures that possibly need to get done, and then I'd have a conversation following up to make sure you place them right. And then there's a follow-up session even a while later to make sure the energy is good and aligned and any updates or things that need to
cool.
get done. And so that's a thorough,
Well,
thorough session.
yeah, there's a lot there, and
Yeah.
it's really really interesting. I hope that some people reach out and get involved in this stuff because I think it could be a big game changer for a lot of people out there.
Yeah.
So getting towards the end here, Nalassa, there's something that I like to ask all the guests that come on. I'm going to have to ask you if it's okay to be a little vulnerable, a little honest, authentic, open up a little bit. But basically, it's all about mental health. I'm a big advocate for mental health. I've definitely had my challenges, my struggles with anxieties, depressions, after big relationship breakdowns and other stuff that's gone on in my life, so I think it's important to talk about it. And I do think that when people see people on podcasts doing this, doing that, having success, building business, if they're not in a great place, especially with social media now, comparing to everybody, beating themselves up, but I like to highlight, you know, the fact that everybody has their challenges and their struggles and their troubles, whatever you're doing, wherever you are in life, on your journey in business, relationships, wherever. So really, the simple question is just, today in this moment, are you happy?
That's the question. Am I happy? I am
That's
happy.
that's the question. Are
I
you
would say
happy?
I'm
How are
definitely
you feeling?
happy. Not to say that there aren't things that I'd like improving on. But as far as happiness goes, I think absolutely. And I mean, I think in the like from this conversation and me talking about what I do, it's like I love what I do. Like I love get like what I feel like I ultimately give people is like a way for them to settle into their body and settle into their home and feel connected and calm and collected. And in ways that I do that with people, it creates such a massive like ripple effect throughout their lives. And I'm saying this because in in traveling in like living from your heart, like that ripple effect of appreciating, the nuance of different moments, of different experiences, um, is lovely. Like I absolutely like I love life. I love like the world that I'm creating for myself, and like in the work that I do, it's like how can I gift that to places and people as much as possible.
Wow. It seems like people who live a certain way, like you and like Jess that I had on yesterday, and other people that I know in my life who are very enlightened and spiritual and full of love, they are genuinely just a lot happier than the majority of people that are just like grinding out a job and paying the bills and watching Netflix every night and drinking a bottle of wine. It's really, yeah, it's all these little things, and it's a different way of life, really, and I think it's amazing. So I'm guessing that's a yes. Nalassa is happy. I
Yes.
think it definitely sounds that way, and I'm glad. Um, there is a lot of unhappy people at the moment, but I do think that there are things that you can incorporate into your life if you're struggling. Doesn't have to be huge transformational shifts right from the beginning, but just little steps that you can start implementing into your routine that can start to calm things down and make you a little bit more content and appreciative of practices, stuff like that. So, and I'm sure that's something else that you're going to bring to your meetings and to your work if people reach out to you as well. So I think it's a win-win.
Yeah.
Nalassa, we have reached the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. We're going to put all of Nalassa's information in the show notes so they can reach out to you directly, set up a call, set up a meeting, get involved with everything that you've just heard. I think it's really interesting, really fascinating, and I think it's something that's that I think a lot of people are going to be interested in as well. So hopefully a lot of people reach out.
Yeah.
Nalassa,
Thank you absolutely so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for everybody at home for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time on another episode of the Airbnb Nomads podcast.